More Engine War news from Games Workshop today, this time for the dread forces of the Chaos Knights. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today sees us with another faction preview from Engine War, the additional rules and abilities that Chaos Knights will be getting in the new book. It looks like they're going to be quite a lot simpler than the AdMech. The things that the Chaos Knights seem to be getting are plain and simply that they're going to be getting Dread households. Basically, when the Chaos Knight book came out, they essentially have Iconoclast, which is the equivalent of the Questor Imperialis Knights from the main Imperial Knights Codex, and the Infernal Knights, which are more sort of Demon Engine, Dark Mechanicum type inspired knights, and very much the dark mirror of the Questor Mechanicus. It was interesting in the Chaos Knight book that they didn't get households. It looks like to me in this update the Chaos Knights will be getting households, where the Imperial Knights will be getting extra bonuses for either being Questor Mechanicus or Questor Imperialis. From this Warhammer community preview, we've essentially got two new sections. You can nominate your knights to be part of one of the 5 Dread households, who each have their own Dread household bond, equivalent to their chapter tactic, and Warlord trait, relic and stratagem. As well as this, you also now have the option to create your own Dread household, so a custom one made up of 2 composite traits, much in the normal way, though of course you won't access an extra stratagem, relic and trait for that. Let's take a look at what we've got then with the new rules. So first up, they've told us about the 5 households that we can get, and those 4 benefits that we mentioned. There will be 3 Iconoclast households in Lucaris, Herpetrax and Chimere, and 2 Infernal households in House Vertrix and House Commentus. I'm going to assume that the Chaos Knights are just going to get this on top of their already pretty decent benefit for either being Infernal or Iconoclast, so I suspect it's just going to be a flat buff to the raw strength and power of the Chaos Knight Codex. I guess it's not 100% confirmed that that's going to be the case at the moment, and there isn't any trade-off for doing this, but that's certainly what I'd assume based on the information to hand. They've only previewed 1 trait so far out of the Knight households, and it's the one for House Herpetrax, so an Iconoclast household. The trait is a flat buff, but I'd say it's a fairly weak flat buff at that. Their trait is Dauntless, and you just add 2 to the wounds characteristics of models with this bond, and 1 instead if the model is a War Dog. Now, I can't say I'm overwhelmed with this one. Essentially, it's a durability buff, and on your standard Chaos Knights and War Dogs, it'll math out to a measly 8% durability increase. This is just worse than, say, the Imperial Knight equivalent, which would be House Tyrannus, who gets that 6+ feel no pain against everything that isn't mortal wounds, and that actually maths out to be a 20% durability increase. So, while obviously helpful, it really isn't all that much of a big deal. I think we're going to have to wait to see what the other traits are. It might be that they've purposely kept them as fairly minor benefits, as of course the Chaos Knights are already fairly decently strong in themselves, with the decent benefits for being Iconoclast or Infernal, providing some very scary buffs to the shooting and melee of the Knights. While that's the only trait that they've shown off, they have previewed some of the other bits. For House Chimere, which is another one of the Iconoclast Knights, you get Fury of Surtur's Wake, which is a 2 command point shooting phase stratagem, and you select 1 House Chimere model in your army, and you roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 3 inches of that model. On a 4+, each enemy unit within 3 inches suffers a d3 mortal wound hit. So 2 command points is maybe a little bit pricey, but I could see this one being situationally useful, particularly if your knight happens to be absolutely surrounded by loads of enemy units. If you can manage to get this guy into the middle of the enemy army, say tagging 4 units or so, you can make a fair few things a bit more dead. We have a Warlord trait for House Lucaris, which is the 3rd of the previewed Iconoclast households. This one is the Strike First, Strike Often, and it's essentially always Fight First for your Warlord. Honestly, I'm not sure how well this compares with any flat damage dealing traits or flat defensive traits. I'm never really the biggest fan of this ability, because if you're charging, you're fighting first anyway, and if the enemy charges, then unless they're charging with multiple units, then they can always nominate one of those units to strike first, even regardless of this. Could be okay in ongoing combats, but knights have the advantage of being able to fall back, shoot and then charge again, so there's very rarely going to be times that you're not going to be charging. It's certainly not nothing, but I'm really not the biggest fan, and I think I'd take something else. If we move on to the other ones, we've got a couple of things for the Infernal households here. The houses Vextrix and Commentus. For Vextrix, we have a Heretic Power Core relic, which provides a few minor buffs. It adds 1 to the movement, so typically big knights will be movement 13 rather than 12. +1 to the damage of the Reaper Chainsword or Thunderstrike Gauntlet, so damage 7 rather than damage 6, and +1 to the result of the roll if you're rolling to see whether or not you explode. Again, I'm afraid it's not the most overwhelming relic in the world. +1 inches is very nice to have, but even on a big unit like an Imperial Knight, it's a fairly small boost relative to how far it already moves. The +1 damage on the Chainsword going to damage 7 isn't always going to be all that meaningful. If you do get 2 Chainsword hits through, you're likely going to be killing most standard vehicles anyway, so I think it's going to be rare that the +1 damage is going to make all that much difference to your knight when it reaches close combat, as often you're also going to be wanting to strike with those stompy feet anyway, which would make that pointless as well. To be honest, from my point of view, my favourite part of it is the extra explosion chance, as having a 5+ to deal that enormous mortal wound explosion that knights can do so well is certainly a good thing in my eyes, and it means that you could get away without using the 2 command points to blow up on a 4+ should you be surrounded with enemies. I do admit though it could be a weakness if you happen to be nearby your own forces when it goes down, as it could be a relic that winds up ripping huge chunks out of your own army thanks to the knight's mortal wounds. Again, sadly Chaos Knights have some excellent relics already, and I'm not sure that this one's going to quite make the cut. Finally, for House Commentis, we have 1 command point for Encircling Hounds, which is a once per battle stratagem allowing you to set your war dogs up in reserve off the board, and then they can come in within 6 inches of a battlefield edge and more than 9 inches from enemy models. This one's one of the most interesting ones so far, to be honest. It means that you could be getting your war dogs armed with Melter and Chain Cleaver to have a guaranteed 9-inch charge on at least some enemy units, and hopefully have a better chance of getting their Melter in effective range as well. Against some armies, I could certainly see this being very worthwhile indeed. So overall from the households, these aren't the most inspiring rules that I've ever seen, but if they work the way we think they will, then at least the household bonds will provide a flat buff to Chaos Knights, so they will be getting stronger one way or the other. I think one of the most interesting things that we're going to see are those household traits. I really wouldn't be surprised if there's one that's stronger than just gain a couple of wounds. So far, none of the other bits have massively inspired me as ways that could efficiently run a Chaos Knight army compared with what we have already, though please let me know if you think that I've underestimated anything. Finally though, and also very interestingly, we now have custom dread households as well. These are the standard 2-part composite custom traits, where it looks like we're going to be able to take any 2 of these traits in place of one of the standard household traits. I think this pretty much also confirms that Imperial Knights will be getting the same thing, so it's going to be good to see what sort of goodies they get as well. Games Workshop have shown off 2 of these, which are Slayer of Kings and Pinpoint Cruelty, which will be allowed to be picked together. Slayer of Kings is a bonus against vehicles and monsters, and you add +1 to the hit roll with a melee weapon against these foes. So honestly the buff is really quite strong, but it is only in melee and only against 2 types of units out of the roster in 40k. Most armies, though not all, will have vehicles or monsters. They're not always the most practical to deal with in melee, say if you're facing an Astra Militarum tank line, and they're parked right behind a whole ton of guard infantry. I think this could potentially be strongest if we're combating any advancing vehicles, particularly things like other enemy knights, where hitting on 2s in close combat is going to be an incredibly nice advantage indeed. I'm presuming that we're also going to be able to combine these with Iconoclast or Infernal, though again it's not 100% confirmed. The second one we have is Pinpoint Cruelty, which is a bonus to damage rolls. Basically, whenever a model with this characteristic is chosen to shoot or fight with, you can choose to re-roll a single damage dice when determining the damage characteristic of a weapon that has successfully got through the enemy saves. I must say that this looks like a particularly good one out of everything that we've seen so far, particularly as it might be able to combine with something else that could buff shooting or melee in different ways. This is going to favour multiple small units as it's 1 re-roll per knight, so I think it could likely be the strongest buff to the Armiger Warglaive version of the War Dogs, potentially ones with thermal spears or melter guns or even both. Being able to re-roll 1 damage roll per knight could save you command points over the course of the game and just makes them a lot more reliable. If you get that melter hit through, then it means that you're going to actually do some significant damage. It's a bit less useful on the big knights, as at best, even if you have 3 of them all armed with our favourite twin thermal cannons, you still could just be re-rolling 3 damage results per turn, which certainly isn't nothing, but it isn't quite as big a buff to their overall firepower. I guess we'll have to see if there's another great secondary buff that we can combine it with that might be either better for the big knights or the war dogs. So overall for me, I think that it looks like the household buffs are going to be the strongest part of this, as from all indications at the moment, it just looks like they're going to be a flat upgrade on top of all the things that we already have, and not fights for opportunity cost, such as the warlord traits, relics and stratagems will. It looks like Chaos Knights are going to get better in one way or another, and it's going to be interesting to see which are the ways that are going to be most impactful in game. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll be trying to cover all of the races in Engine War when it comes out at the weekend, with hopefully a little bit more content on the Chaos Knights to follow after that. So subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see any of that. If you've been enjoying the channel recently and would like to help support it, I'd just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which has a link down in the description below. The Patreon is what allows me to spend quite this much time making videos about model soldiers, so if you are watching regularly then any support is greatly appreciated, as it helps keep the channel going. As well as keeping the videos coming, you also get to see early videos each week, get to vote on regular polls on what sort of units and things I review next, and there are regular prize draws where I post out miniatures to lucky Patreon winners, the next one being the Space Marine contents of the box of No Fear. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link's down in the description below, and a big thank you to my current patrons for making this channel possible. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.